Hello and welcome to this general astrological overview for the day of April 16th, 2022. So today is the day we have the full moon in Libra. As many of you know, the full moon is the part of the month where things come to a head and the energy really peaks in a powerful way. And this full moon in Libra is really emphasizing the idea of self versus other in a very powerful way. So the sun here in the sign of Aries, the sign of the self, and the moon here in Libra, the sign of the other, or the balancing, the diplomacy, the almost more relationship oriented or other oriented, you could say. And so I think the idea of relationships is going to be a very prominent factor with this full moon, but it's also going to depend on where it falls in your chart. But notice also that it is trine Saturn and square to Pluto. So the trine to Saturn is certainly nice. It gives some much needed stability to this otherwise potentially not so stable full moon. And there might be a sense of it is what it is-ness or reality, or dealing with realities, but not so much in a harsh way, at least not for the Saturn part of things, because it is a nice trine to Saturn, and Saturn also has great affinity with the sign of Libra. That is where it is exalted, and so Saturn really likes Libra. So there's a lot of harmony on that front. However, the square to Pluto, not so much. You can see that Pluto is indeed square the sun, moon, full moon axis, you could call it. And also, just for those who may be wondering, the full moon does perfect just before 3 p.m. Eastern time. Now, basically, the energy is going to be active all day today, but just for those who are wondering, this is about the time that it perfects, just before 3 p.m. Eastern time. That square to Pluto is a bit challenging. It is being confronted with things from the deep and the dark and the psychological. It is being confronted with the need to transform, especially, again, that self versus other, that transformation of relationships, stressful dynamics that can develop in those areas, stressful situations that push us into new areas of activity. And it's interesting also when you observe that the full moon with Pluto here forms a T-square, and thus there is this pressure created, as if this was like three sides of a table onto what would make it a perfect square, which takes us down here to the sign of Cancer, and thus pushing into that Cancerian energy of being very careful and cautious and private and focused on one's inner world and emotional and sort of seeking the deep meaning. And maybe, well, of course, with Cancer, a very big theme is establishing a safe environment in which something can grow. So like being pushed into that from this full moon energy. And I would say, again, for those of you who are students of astrology and familiar with your own chart, note not only what axis this full moon is taking place, and particularly the moon itself, like what house does the sign of Libra overlap with in your chart, but note this Capricorn Cancer axis, and note what house does Pluto fall in here, the sign of Capricorn, what does that overlap with, and the sign of Cancer as well, because the pressure that is built from this full moon is going to push you into that sign of Cancer, into that area of your life. And so that is quite significant. Now, that's the main thing to know for today. The only other thing really that we have is around about 8:30 p.m. Eastern time, the moon does enter Scorpio. The moon changes signs to deep, dark, passionate Scorpio. And so the vibe becomes a bit more serious, a bit more inwardly focused, a bit more. It really has quite the affinity with that square to Pluto that we just had with the full moon itself. So I would say, if anything, expect an intensification of those energies around this time. And then it's interesting because as that happens, it's also moving into this nice trine with Mars now in Pisces and the moon here in Scorpio, both water signs. And so this is like, on one level, breakthroughs involving our action, motivation, anger, or aggression. But on another level, Mars and Pisces being like the spiritual warrior and like acting on faith, acting on intuition, acting on belief, being motivated by the unseen, being motivated by more emotional or intuitive or spiritual, quote unquote, forces, these sorts of things. And so we definitely enter like a deeper, almost otherworldly state as the day and night goes on, or as the day turns into night and as the evening goes on further into the night. So very interesting full moon indeed. The only other thing that I would say is notice these interlocking energies building right now. The Mercury-Uranus conjunction is building, so that's like the great big sudden ideas and revelations and realizations. And they are, of course, sextile Venus. You could say that Venus is currently sextile the Mercury-Uranus midpoint. And so there's this Venusian support to the big new exciting idea. So we are having these like new ideas or realizations or revelations, and we like that. However, I must say, like in very practical terms, there's a very good chance that that's simply going to be mostly, if not totally, overshadowed by this very intense full moon energy that we have. And just, well, I guess one more thing I could say about that full moon, it is interesting how it is in the sign of Libra, in the sense of Libra being such a harmony-seeking sign, the peacemaker, the peace seeker, the diplomat, and of course ruled by Venus, as we were just talking about. Venus, that which is interested in what is aesthetically pleasing and that sort of thing. And yet, that square to Pluto is saying that it's not going to be all just beautiful and wonderful. There's something very deep and dark that this full moon is like confronted with, or that we are confronted with during it. And it's almost like that square to Pluto is saying that something that would otherwise be very beautiful is being like tainted, or dare I say almost ruined, by something very dark and ominous, and something like from deep within that needs to be brought to the surface. So with all of that said, that is your full moon forecast here for April 16th. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you have a wonderfully deep and hopefully positively transformative full moon day.